Welcome to None of the Above. Today is the 6th of July, 2026. I'm Robert. The purpose of this show is to cut through all the black and white analysis, propaganda, and political theater which dominates the geopolitical world today. The usual A or B options that are given to us by the political elite are usually destructive to the regular people. That's why here we're choosing option C, which is the best solution for today's issue, anchorage or bust. Right now, the situation is getting far worse, far more quickly than in the past 4 years of the special military operation in Ukraine. President Vladimir Putin, now, perhaps reluctantly, is joining Sergei Lavrov and other outspoken Russian leaders in announcing the year-old Anchorage deal dead. Here's the bottom line. This most certainly assures that the conflict will be ended militarily on the battlefield. Russia has made it clear there will be no more talks with the West, in particular U.S. Special Envoys Kushner and Witkoff. Putin spent the better part of a year holding on to the false hope for peace and economic growth through statements regarding the Anchorage deal made in his speeches, with no momentum toward any realized goals. The Russian hardliners, including Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of the Security Council, and Foreign Minister Lavrov, have remained skeptical, if not hostile, to this continued approach. The United States is desperately trying to make peace with Iran in the form of a memorandum of understanding, wherein there's 14 points to be carried out one after another. President Donald Trump signed this agreement, then immediately began making threats against Iranian diplomats. This paused the deal. The meeting reconvened several days later on the 17th of June 2026, wherein the MOU was signed by Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian and Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif as mediator. Once again, honestly, the Trump administration's MOU was obviously never designed as a framework for actual peace. The MOU is the same Trojan horse we saw with the Syrian model and Minsk Agreements 1 and 2. It's a false ceasefire deal intended for the building up of further PR frameworks and weapons stockpiles for continued aggression. The MOU would further serve as a smokescreen for the concentration of weapons in the Ukrainian theater under the guise of NATO defensive posturing. Ukraine has dramatically escalated attacks with Crimea over the past weeks, hitting fuel depots, water treatment and pumping facilities, and energy infrastructure. They've also begun terror strikes into Belarus, following up on public threats made last week by President Volodymyr Zelensky. Several buses were targeted, resulting in Belarusian casualties, including the deaths of several school children. Once again, loading drones with kerosene to create bigger fires and deliberately widening the war with these terror tactics is pure political theater. This is not a serious military strategy. These efforts are designed to make Russia appear incapable of defending its people and allies. This is NATO funding desperation, plain and simple. The European Union is also openly talking about military buildup and direct war with Russia. Several countries have now signed contracts to build drone factories and weapons production inside their own borders. Germany, the United Kingdom, Denmark, Latvia, the Netherlands, and Norway have all committed to major defense manufacturing deals. Meanwhile, Finland and Lithuania are moving to accept nuclear weapons on their soil, with Finland's parliament voting to lift the long-standing ban and Lithuania considering removing its constitutional prohibition. All the while, Several major drone and missile attacks on Russian cities and oil storage facilities in recent weeks have already been launched from and flown through NATO member territory, a clear provocation. Here's the reality. Russia's been drawing more red lines with the EU and NATO. Well behind on defense production, NATO, the European Union, are desperately ramping up manufacturing with their economies suffering. And yet the EU just approved another $90 billion in financial aid for Ukraine for the years 2026 through 2027. All right, let's be frank. None of these issues are being solved diplomatically by either side. On one side, you have reckless aggression from NATO and Ukraine. On the other, Russia's backed into a corner and responding like a desperate animal. Neither side is acting in a serious manner, seeking a reduction in hostilities. The threat is getting worse. We are being provided with only two options. The solution to this disaster by analysts, military brass, and political elite are not options at all. Both options lead to the same conclusion: more war. Option A is to keep escalating more weapons, more intelligence sharing, and deliberately maneuvering NATO into direct conflict with Russia. Option B is to continue terror strikes against civilian infrastructure and population centers within Russia and Belarus, which only creates more hatred and guarantees this war drags on for years. Neither option is acceptable to any rational person. They do not provide a path to substantive binding agreements or lasting peace. We must therefore choose option C, none of the above. In this segment, this is what we do best on this channel. We're going to provide the practical solution. The practical solution requires an historically neutral nation state to serve as mediator, notary, and archivist of all agreements of this conflict moving forward. This third-party mediator shall provide the venue and legal framework for all future agreements. They would be responsible for upholding all applicable international, maritime, and territorial law, and could be called upon to defend the legality of these agreements in international courts if necessary. As archivist, the mediator would keep all the terms of agreements confidential, only releasing information when required for compliance, oversight, legal proceedings, or termination of terms. The first step would be simple. A 90-day economic agreement between Russia, Ukraine, and the United States, conducted quietly, without public announcement, as none may want to admit they've entered into negotiations while the conflict is still ongoing. It is for the purpose of providing immediate economic relief and good faith demonstration for the three majority parties. This following agreement would require a practical system to identify and protect the shipping and insurers involved while ensuring full compliance with international maritime law. The neutral mediator would be responsible for documentation and oversight of the protected trade corridors. 1. Russia would have USA sanctions lifted on oil and oil products to India and Southeast Asia. 2. Ukraine would be permitted to export grains to North Africa. And 3. The United States would supply LNG to Ukraine to help meet its current energy needs. The European Union must necessarily be excluded from this initial agreement, keeping the deal far more diplomatically feasible. Throughout the 90-day period, the mediator should actively encourage the three parties to identify additional areas for economic cooperation. The goal is to steadily build momentum and trust by expanding the scope of the agreement over time. Political demands and territorial issues will not be discussed during this phase. This venue is strictly reserved for economic trade, infrastructure, and humanitarian agreements. This would be a first practical step towards swiftly reducing hostilities and building the architecture for future agreements. All right, my friends, neither option A nor B are reasonable solutions for any thinking person. It should never be the default position of any statesman. Using an historically neutral nation state to implement an incremental 90-day contractual framework for the de-escalation of hostilities in the most destructive international conflict since World War II is exactly what option C looks like in practice. That's it for today, class. Remember, we don't read from Cliff's Notes. We meet mediocrity out by the monkey bars when the bell rings. So hit that bell, subscribe. Until next time, stay the sharpest pencil in the box.